So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Ruth Newberry, Director of Institutional Effectiveness Portfolio Manager for Global Professional Services here. This is our second series about EAC. So this specific session is about demonstrating your course's impact on student learning using EAC. We have a good group here today, so if you do have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat box, or just go ahead and just raise your virtual hand or unmute. But Dr. Newberry, you're good to go. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you, and welcome everybody to our session today. I will encourage you, I do have two screens so I can see the chat, I can see your faces. So like David said, don't hesitate to just raise your hand or put something in the chat and I'll stop. As a follow-up from the first session where we just simply introduced EAC and some of its components, today we want to jump into actually using it within your Ultra courses for rubric and exam insights. I will suggest too that if you have any specific questions about the overall goal or use of EAC on UDC campus, please either reach out to David, who I don't have here on the chart, but I should, Dr. Rebecca Graham or Fatma. They will be really excited to help and answer any questions. As a kind of very, very high level overview of what we're doing with EAC is a tool within Blackboard that can be used at different levels. One level is as a course reporting tool for rubrics and exam effectiveness and insights. That is its most basic level, and that's what we're focusing on today in this discussion. But EAC also has the capacity later, as I work with the team, to also start linking course learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, institutional gen ed learning outcomes to rubric rows, test questions, embedded assessment rubrics in your Ultra courses. So that's the long-term view. That's where we want to get to ultimately giving insights to programs and the institution on student performance. But it all starts with the use of EAC as a course reporting tool. The idea is that we want to leverage what you are already doing in your courses. That is, you're giving assignments, you're giving exams, you're hosting discussion forums, you're doing blogs, all of those activities already in your Ultra courses, whether you're supporting an in-person course, a high flex or a hybrid course, or an online course. But we want to take what you're doing now and start being able to pull insights for you at the course level out of those courses using the EAC tool. So let me first explain the acronym. It is Educational Assessment Corporation. EAC is an exclusive partner of Anthology and Blackboard. We have been working with them since 2017. They are a tool that can be added to your Blackboard environment, but they actually started in 2009 with the health professions and as an exam analysis tool, particularly for nurses and other programs that at that time had been going through a revamping of their curriculum and their licensure exam, and really needed to have a deep level of insight into the exams. From then, they've expanded to institutional rubrics, tests, learning outcomes. So as it says here, it can be a test and analysis software. It can be a rubric analysis. It works with original ultra courses and really is providing kind of a role-based approach. So instructors and then others get added in later. One of the key concepts, though, that I do want to point out early is EAC is not a grade book. It's not a replica of your grade book. It'll present data a little differently because it's all about us looking at assessment and helping to compare instruments across semesters and learning outcomes ultimately across the variety of courses. So EAC does what most statistics require, and that is it has to normalize some of the data. So for instance, if I have a rubric in my course that is worth 50 points because each of the 5 rows is worth 10 points, in EAC, we are going to make each row 1 point. And then that way we can compare against another rubric that has a row aligned to perhaps an outcome, and it too will be 1 point. So we'll go into this a little bit more, but just know that you're not going to see exactly the same representation of row values or question values as we go forward. So what EAC at the course level is intended to do is really provide those insights to you, the instructor, on the effectiveness of your rubric and the exam in your course with a certain population of students to help you then better understand, 1, did I actually measure my students well? 2, where are students struggling? Which either row criterion or a certain set of exam questions, where are they doing well? And what insights might I be able to gather as I even dig deeper, not just into the row by row comparison or question by question comparison, but even down to the individual student? What insights can I gather? To do this, though, there are a couple steps that we have to consider first, and that is best practices just in course design. So I know that as an institution, you are involved in quality matters. In my past institution, when I was not in this role, which I've been in for 8.5 years, but previously, we too use the quality matters rubrics to help us design good courses. And really quality matters, when you think about it, is embedded on and really looks at your course learning outcomes. They then drive the design of your course. You want to make sure that your content, your instructional support approach, the very learning activities that you put into the course, and any resources all support the students' attainment of those course learning outcomes. So quality matters is a good way of understanding when we tend to maybe put in some extraneous stuff that could be fun, but the question is it really supporting the students' learning? Or we have assignments in there that we want to add, we have to ask ourselves, is it really supporting student attainment of those learning outcomes? So the intent of the course in Quality Matters is really, are we developing the skills, knowledge, and abilities of our students? So that's just a best practice always to apply, no matter how you're delivering the course. Online, again, in person, or kind of a flex or hybrid model. The next, though, is critically important to thinking about the reports that we're going to get out of EAC. And that is when we create those activities, those learning activities, papers, projects, discussion forums, presentations students are going to do, group work, exams. They really need to be aligned to those course learning outcomes in the sense, again, they're either providing practice for the students, so more formative kind of uses. And when we see the results, we need to keep that in mind, that these are practice and formative type activities, or they're intended to reinforce, build new skills for students. And then ideally, we have key assignments in there that are really to measure whether or not our students understand the material, have developed the skills, and to what level, and has our course been successful. So when we think of it that way, when we think about the assignments, the rubrics, and the exams, we want to be sure that they are valid. And by validity, only the content expert really knows if the question, the rubric, and the content is truly aligning, and aligning at the level that it should. By that, I mean, if you think about Bloom's taxonomy, if I'm teaching a 100 level course or a 200 level course, I'm typically introducing concepts, reinforcing concepts. So I'm going to be looking at our students' understanding. Can they recall key information? Can they tell me that they know what a term means and its definition? Can they apply, or at least tell me how certain ideas or theories or content applies to situations? But if I'm teaching a 300 or 400 level course, my assignments should be at that next level, my exams and rubrics as well, looking at how well students are not just applying, less recall and understanding, but actually applying, using, creating, and evaluating what that content I've been teaching into different applications or uses, whether it's case scenarios, whether it's, creating that interpretation of a piece of literature, or looking at how I can take what I've learned and apply it to real world solutions. So there's a level of knowing that the assignments in your courses and the measurement tools are valid in the sense of, do they align to the curricular level? Next is, though, are they actually measuring what you're asking students to do in your courses? So this was where assignments, again, and by assignments, I don't always mean papers. I mean discussion forums, again, group activities, your presentations, whatever you are asking the student to do, is it designed to help them demonstrate what they have learned or don't know? So it's all about designing assignments and activities to begin to differentiate and discriminate between those who know the material, can use the material, have the skills, and those who do not. So activities are critical to the validity idea. You need to first make sure that activity is aligned to the outcomes of your course, to the curricular level of the course, to the very things that you are trying to measure. Then the evaluation part, that's the rubrics and the tasks. So they too need to be valid or pass a kind of validity test. And again, the subject matter expert is the one that knows. So when I look at the criterion in my rubric, I'm going to be asking, did my assignment ask the students to do this? And my levels of achievement Have I really made it clear where the cutoff is to those students that don't know and those students that do know, and how well they know things? So again, that rubric is going to be structured on the assignment and the activities and the skills that we're trying to measure. Same with exams. Does the question also enable the student to demonstrate what they know and don't know, how they use or don't use a certain concept? Now, if we construct the exam and the rubrics in these ways, then when we get to the EAC reports, the insight, we already can be assured that the tools are measuring what we have intended. We do not have an issue with validity. And that will play into then our confidence level, into the reliability scores that the tool will give us to help us further look at where students are struggling and where they are not struggling. So the key question, really with validity is, are we really measuring what we should be measuring in the course? Are we looking at the criterion in terms of the assignment and the questions in terms of content? If we are, then when it comes time to build that grading rubric, we're building it to understand, again, where students are knowledgeable and where they're not, where they're struggling, where they are not struggling, so forth. So like a grading rubric, I could, again, have columns up here, exceeds, above average, competent, inadequate, developing, and I can see my scale got turned around in my picture. I don't know why that happened. I have to change that. You can see the inadequate and the developing should be on the far end. That's weird. But I'm looking at, again, this column competent is my benchmark between students that don't know and students that do know, and then how well they know this content. My criterion are going to be aligned to what I've asked them to do in this activity, and my descriptors help guide me to understanding where I should measure my students. And if I've aligned all of this well, then I have confidence in the validness of my measurement. And then the next thing I want to know is, how did my students do? Same with exam questions. I'm going to be asking, is my exam question aligned to the content of my course? My distractors or responses, possible answers, is that helping to differentiate my learners? And in exams, always did I select the correct answer? So that when we start looking at reports, what EAC is going to help us understand, as with a question here, is how many students selected each of the answers? Why is it I have so few students selecting the correct answer and more getting it wrong? And why, by the way, did so many students select answer A? So EAC is going to help us first show where students are doing well, where they're not, but then it's going to help us in terms of test questions begin to look at, oh, is there something wrong with response A? Can it be clearer? Do I have low scoring, high scoring students selecting a response, which means there's a lot of guessing going on? But what can I do to make this clearer? Or I'm learning that my students really don't understand this, whatever this question is about. So I know instructionally to follow up after this exam, I should be attending to this detail, this concept, the skill, this ability, whatever is measured. Same with rubrics. What EAC will start to help us understand is where students fell in these different ranges according to our grading rubric. And the range, again, A, B, C, D, F, you construct the rubric for your grading purposes. You may have 4 columns, 3 columns, 5 columns, even maybe 6 columns. That doesn't matter. What EAC is looking at, again, is a row by row review of how your students have performed. So again, I might be looking at this last one. I can see I have quite a distribution. That is telling me that, again, this concept, this criterion, I need to look at more closely in terms of instruction, in terms of the requirements of the assignment itself, even maybe in terms of how I've defined what these ranges would be. It's, again, a note that this needs a little bit more investigation. So these reports are intended to help you identify where your students are according to how you scored them on your rubrics, or given the exams that you've delivered, and what they're doing well on and what they're not, and whether or not sometimes the rubric needs to be adjusted, or actually the question needs to be adjusted, or the assignment needs to be adjusted to help students learn better. Questions? Any questions before we jump into the next section, which is a demonstration of the tool? No? Okay. Well, you can, at this point, if you would like, you can join me. If you have more than one screen, if you don't, I would say just watch and try this later. But if you have 2 screens, you certainly could open up your Blackboard system on one screen and go to the tools area once you're logged in and find the EAC visual data icon. So if I minimize this now and jump over to your system, you can see in the tools area, I have this icon. And when I click on it, it's gonna open up and be ready for me to use. So what I need to do, though, is I'm going to jump to my test server and pretend to be faculty using this. So let's go to OPDMA. Now, if my background is actually my PhD is in English, American literature, 20th century. You may recognize some of my character names here, but Opedia is an English instructor. And in her courses that she's offered, she teaches a writing course. What she wants to know is the effectiveness of her rubric. So when she goes to tools and opens up EAC, it's going to open up here and we'll see tests, rubrics, and goals. We are only going to look at tests and rubrics today. And for her, she's looking at rubrics in her course. So she's going to click on the rubrics area. It'll highlight. She's going to go back for her several semesters and find her courses. So you always have a date range. That date range is what you set to find rubrics that have been scored. So in this case, I'm going all the way back to 2020 and my courses offered then. If you wanted to look at your fall courses and all the rubrics in your fall courses, then you would come here to the date range, click on the year, and we come up to 2023, and we would want to go back to March, select the first, and whoops, 2022, August, my fault. Let's go to 2022, August 1st. That would be fall term to the present. So the date ranges you can slice to maybe just be the rubrics you offered at the end of the term, just those in the midterm, those used across the whole term, those used for an entire academic year. These date ranges allow you to do that. I'm going to, again, set mine back, and then I'm going to click go. So when I select go there, it brings me up a list of the rubrics in my courses that I have taught. And I have 3 of them here. In this case, I may want to look at my English rubric. I may want to look at this writing rubric. I may even want to, let me go back one more. I want to find my essay grading rubric. So if you don't see a rubric that you know you've scored, your date ranges may not be as comprehensive as they should be. So be sure that you don't panic. They're there. Just be sure that you have your date ranges. Now, if I look at my grading rubric, I just want to look at it, I can click on it, on the name, and it's going to open up. And I can see here's my English 150 grading rubric. It was scored during this time frame. If I use a common rubric, a rubric more than once in different sections that I teach, and it is exactly the same, like this one here, I can check the box and it's going to combine them. And then I can click the arrow. And now I'm going to see both of my uses of this rubric. If I want to just see one of them, I can also just uncheck and select one. So this list is simply that. What it asks, what do you want to look at today? So let's go first to my grading rubric here. You'll notice there is a menu on the side. This menu is going to be very similar when we start to look at a test. What we are going to look at is courses included, summary statistics, row analysis, student rows, details. That is all the farther we're going to go as a course reporting tool. None of the other data here becomes really important until we start adding learning outcomes, okay? But so with this, we always start with, well, what is the course? Here it is. Here's my section number, who I'm team teaching with several faculty. Here's the number of students enrolled in my course and the number of students that I actually evaluated. So got all of them, submitted their work, and an evaluation was done. And then we have a pass number of students passed and a pass percentage. That has to do with a target. So if you remember when I was talking about the rubric itself, there's usually a column in there that is our benchmark between marking unsatisfactory work, satisfactory work. If I think of a grading scale, it could be 60%. That is a D, what is marked as passing. But I really may want to look at how many of my students are at that mid-C range. So I can change this target up and down, maybe even a high 80, a B. How many students are meeting my target, that pass? So I can see when I set it at 80, none of my 10 students scored well enough on the entire rubric to meet that target. If I go back down to maybe a 70, 8 of my students made it. If I go back down to that 0.6, all 10 students. So this allows you to kind of think about how many of your students are meeting what you would like to see as that level of competence, and you can adjust it. Only happens here. Does not do anything to that rubric and those scores in your grade book. Okay, so what we are doing is pulling information out and letting you look at it and manipulate some of it here, but we are not pushing it back to the Blackboard course, nor making any changes in that course. Now, from this, again, best if I set a target. So I'm going to just set it at a mid-C range, thinking about this as 0 to 1. Here are my courses. I just have the 1. Now, the next stage that's most important is this summary statistics. So in the menu over here to the left, I'm just going to click on it. Now you notice if I click the plus, I kind of have to scroll. So I always recommend don't worry about the pluses unless you want to see multiple areas on one screen. Instead, click the name. So summary statistics. What do I learn here is that I have 10 students that were scored, 7 rows on my rubric. Multiply those, 7 possible items that would be scored. I scored everybody on each row and a level of achievement. I didn't skip any rows by accident or purpose. Everyone is scored. Given my target, then 8 of my 10 students met it, 80 or 80% in this case. Now, high, low, mean, median, standard deviation. Notice I have 7 rows. This is the normalization. My rubric, again, could have been worth 100 points, 100%, 20 points, whatever. What we need to do statistically is now make every one of my rows 1 point. And each of those levels of achievement, a percentage of that. So think about, a 4 row, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 1. So in a rubric, we're breaking out the levels of achievement, which you can actually see here at the bottom of the menu. And this is how we're scoring this particular rubric with those different levels statistically. Now, I could alter this a bit if I wanted and make this a point to, spread it out a little bit more. I could also go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if that makes it easier for me to understand. But this will show you how the rows, the columns, the levels of achievement are being interpreted. So I'm just going to leave it set right now. So when we say high score, no one got a perfect rubric. Otherwise, we would see 7, because 7 rows, 1 point each, give us 7. Low score, again, we see no one got a 0, nor really, really low either. So we have a 4.65. The very fact that we have a 0.65, a point here, means I used a range in my rubric itself, maybe a percent range, maybe a point range. Otherwise, we'd see more whole number type numbers here. Given this and the 7, here's our mean and median and our standard deviation across the rubric as a whole. Your standard deviation in this area of assessment, often it's good to have a larger standard deviation because that means you've not bunched all the students in the middle at one end or the other, but there is a distribution. All of that helps. This mean, median, and standard deviation helps us figure out the reliability score of your rubric, and that's what this is. So anything a 0.5 and above for a major assignment is good. If this were a practice assignment, my KR20 may be a 0.25 because I allowed students to repeat their submissions, so forth. Then it's going to say, ooh, that's kind of weird. Your rubric isn't really discriminating. Well, that wasn't the point of that rubric and activity. So one of the key things is to remember this is all guidance. You have to think about who those 10 students are, the level that they're at, and the reason or use of the activity in the rubric itself. They're just guidance, but this tells me we're doing pretty well. My low scorers are tending to consistently be scored where they statistically would be, high scorers scoring above. Now, next level, let me just look at the row by row. Remember, we had 7 different rows in this. So here are my 7 rows, okay? These are the criterion in my rubric. And this is this average, all 10 students, given where they fell across their those levels of achievement, what was the overall performance average of the group? So I can see they're doing fairly well. So, not so well on grammar and mechanics, which we might certainly expect. Not so as well as the other rows on style, exceedingly well on format. Okay. Again, standard deviation by row. And here I can see there's not a lot of variance. And then point by serial, Cronbach with deletion. These are other statistical tools that tell you how reliable this row is. Again, higher, better. In this one, though, looks specifically at this number here, 0.86. When I look here, do I have any row like this one that is above that 0.86? If I do, this is telling me your rubric would be better without this row, potentially. But I have to remember too, what I'm looking at here is it's really telling me, according especially to my graph, and you look at the green, is everybody doing well? And this lower end, they're not doing so well. Most of my, students are at that higher range, which even means my poorer students on content idea are doing well in this area. I'm scoring them in such a way. And the format, look at this one. There's hardly any differentiation there between low scoring and high scoring. So these type of things can cause your summary statistics, validity, reliability rating to go up or or down. More important though, what I would say at the course level is you want to look at the overall. This is a row students are not doing as well. This they're doing great on. You may expect that. Did you expect the other averages? Maybe not. Now, further insight would be to look at the details. This now breaks out the actual number of students you scored in each of these columns to give you the best, or to calculate your average. You can see, again, even with the pie chart here, most of our students are competent in this area. We only have one student that's not. That's good. But, you know, when I start getting perhaps down here, maybe a few more, but mostly I'm not scoring any of my students at that lower range. So this may tell me, again, my students are where they need to be. If you see more students in the inadequate or the developing, then those rows again would have a lower average. You would be concerned about that and want to make some changes or investigate. So like this first row, we have one student in the developing. And again, one student in the developing. Who are they? This is where you can come down here. This is just that row by row distribution, but now I can see all my students. They're ranked high to low. Anybody in the minus in this difference column, these could be students that are underachieving against the peer average. And then this is the actual score or column they fell into for my rating. So I could be looking here, poor Isabel is the one student that is really below my target. Notice everybody else in these is pretty much above, except here we have more students. And especially if I rank them, we can see there's more students. These are the ones that are struggling on that grammar and mechanics below my target. Now, I can look at it this way. Sometimes faculty find it easier to click these little crosshairs and look at it student by student, row by row. You can download any of these different graphs or items into a variety of learning formats, but most likely you're going to use this standard or summary report. So this is where at the end of the term on my rubrics, I may want to capture all the data in a nice Word document that I could then include in my faculty end of the year performance report or tuck away for later when I think about what I need to improve in that course. But here's where, again, what courses were done, what is the instructor, how many students, my pass rate, my KR20 row by row review of how students did, and then the details. No students. So this will strip out those students, making it FERPA compliant. But if you're really a data nerd and you want to dig even deeper, then you would use the Excel file. The Excel file is going to bring in your student information, your student rows, and then you can manipulate it and again do all kinds of neat things with Excel and build charts if you would like. Now, I know we're going to run out of time. This always happens because tests and rubrics always require a bit more information. But if I were to go back and look at a test in this, whoops, go away. Whoops, I think I just, there we go. If I were to look at a test, it's the same thing. Set your dates, click go, bring in an exam, open that exam up. You get a similar menu. And again, students, how many? Your KR 20. Again, 10 questions, 12 students. My KR 20 is a little lower, but now I can look at the questions and I get hints. Anything in red means I've got high scoring students getting things right, low scoring or getting things wrong, low scoring students getting things right, which means I've got a confusing question potentially. Again, anything higher than my KR 20, like this one again, is a suspect question. So it's guidance. I can look at the question, the type of question, the actual responses. And here's where I can begin to see, like in this question here, I have 4 of my 12 students that selected the right answer. The rest did not. And it tells me these 2 were kind of popular. So I could begin looking at my question stem, this part, and what is or why my students have selected this. Is the question not clear and the response is not clear? Do they really not know this content? And then I can, just like with the rubric, come over here to student questions. Now, in a test, a question is right, which is 1. Question is wrong, which is 0. Or we have partial credit being involved here. And you can see on question 5, here I have some top scoring students getting this wrong. And I might want to look at that. So in doing that, maybe I want to look at Charles here. So Charles, when I do that, I can pull up his test. That was question 5. And in this case, I can see what he actually selected. So this starts to give us insight into the effectiveness of the questions. Where might we need to make some changes in the question or its responses, which are called distractors? How balanced is my test? P-value is just ease or difficulty. If I sort this, here are my really tough questions. Very few students got it right. My mid-range questions, and then my easy questions. For this group of students, always remember, it is for the students you scored on the test or the rubric. So if you have a course that you think your students are really, they're like fantastic students, one might be able to see, oh yeah, questions that were difficult for the past group are now easier for this group. But that's because of the population. So you always have to take all of this within context. Student population, the validity of your questions and that you've worked on to get to this point, and then how students perform. But the idea is, again, to help you find out where students are struggling and where they are not, and making sure that it's not your rubric or your exam itself, but insights into that. So let me stop. I think we have 3 minutes before we're done. I will tell you this is a lot of information. I would suggest go out, find some exams in your courses or rubrics, and start pulling up some of them, see what you learn. I'm going to suggest to David, if you have questions, we may need to, in the next one, deal with some of the more common questions that you have, and encourage you to attend so that we can answer them. So, questions, anybody?
Yeah, excellent. And thank you so much, Dr. Newberry. If there are no questions, I have a question for you. What are the 3 key takeaways that you want attendees to remember from this webinar?
So I think one, of course, is always, how do I just get to the tool? That's
Definitely.
always the first one that comes up. So in your system, it's always going to be in tools, and it's always going to be in this icon. So that's number one. Second is, it's all contextual. And the first key of that context is, did you do a good validity check? So when you're building your rubrics and your assignments, you've looked to make sure that really is aligning to the outcomes of your course. Third thing is, dig into the reports, see what happens, see what you learn, and then questions.
Excellent. And Dr. Newberry, this was a wonderful session. I just want to give a friendly reminder that our next EAC session is on April 20th from 12 to 1 p.m. If you would like to register for that, I put the link in the chat box for you. Also, if you have some extra time, please fill out our survey. We'd love to hear, what we're doing well, or any other topics you would like us to see us cover. And again, just like Dr. Newberry mentioned, you can contact Dr. Rebecca Graham or Fatma if you have any follow-up questions about EAC. And before we conclude, are there any quick questions before we say goodbye?
I'll ask a question,
Yeah.
Because I have a follow-up meeting with Ruth and Rebecca in an hour. So, and I don't know, Rebecca, if Rebecca shared my question about the color scheme of the graphs.
Oh, yeah.
I did mention that. Yeah. Thanks for bringing it up, Kim.
So the color scheme is an accessible scheme purposely. It's already been through all kinds of accessibility tests. Right now, we are not offering the ability to change it, mostly because people are not choosing accessible colors. So we're beginning to define, like, how in Word it gives you those choices, some choices to come. Yeah.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Yeah. Well, if you're putting choice options, I teach geography, and it's always like, is it graded so that you don't actually have to know what each high means? But in this case, you can't look at the chart and know what it is by looking at it. It's not a color scale from darkest to lightest, for example.
Sometimes,
and so you actually have
yes.
to look at the categories and
Yes.
analyze the graph.
Yes. In some cases, that is true. And part of that is a leftover from original, where you could put your scale in any order. And in Ultra, it is always going to be high to low. So that's made the scale and the color schemes a lot easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like the lightest category is dark and the highest category is dark. So you can't tell. You have to read it. I'm like, okay.
Right. Yep.
Anyway.
Good.
But with time, we hope it gets more natural. You get used to it,
At least we're using it.
Yes, that's great. Yeah. So thank you so much, Dr. Cruz. Great question. I do want to thank everyone for joining on this call. We do value your time. And Dr. Newberry, again, thank you for your expertise. This was a wonderful session. And we hope to see everyone on this call again for our third one on April 20th. And with that, stay warm, everyone, and stay safe. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.